Hello! This is Rabble Radio, recorded on Friday, May 30th, 2025. I'm Brianne Doyle. Rabble.ca shares with you the news of the day through a progressive lens. If you're curious about what's happening in Canadian politics, labor, the environment, and beyond, you've come to the right place. This is news for the rest of us. Thanks for tuning in. It's Asian Heritage Month in Canada, and this week on the show, we'll be joined by Sadaf Ahsan and Sarah Sahagian to discuss Asian representation in Canadian pop culture. From books and television to music, the Canadian cultural landscape has made significant strides in embracing diversity, offering richer, more nuanced portrayals of Asian characters and, mostly, moving away from stereotypes and tokenism. Yet, as our conversation reveals, we still have a long way to go. In this conversation, Sarah and Sadaf share some of their recent favorite films, TV shows, books, and music. They also discuss why diversity should be viewed as a valuable opportunity, not a risk, by investors, and emphasize the vital role of behind-the-scenes representation in shaping authentic stories. Here are Sadaf Ahsan and Sarah Sahagian in conversation. Take a listen.
Okay, so we're here with somebody I've known for a very long time, one of my good friends, who's also my co-host of a different podcast called The Reheat, Sadaf Ahsan. So we are discussing, in honor of Asian Heritage Month, we're discussing the representation of Asian people in Canadian popular culture. So Sadaf, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
So for people who either don't normally think about pop culture critically and no shade, or people who just want to know a little bit more, give us your pitch for why pop culture representation is so important, why it matters, and why we should all care about it.
Oof. Well, I hope in a lot of ways it's very obvious, but I think I'll hit you with a few points. One, you're probably living in a world and a society that is very diverse, and all of those people deserve to get to see themselves represented on television. I know for myself, I'm South Asian, so growing up, I didn't have a ton of that, and so it felt less exciting to watch a lot of the content my friends were able to watch, for instance. But as I've gotten older and there's been much more diversified content, I mean, to a degree, it's really beautiful getting to see yourself on screen and see all of the things that maybe you could do or what you could be like. I know for children it matters so much, but it also matters the older that you get. And I think it's important that the content we watch is representative of the world that we live in, right? It just makes sense.
Absolutely. So let's dive into our focus, which is the representation of Asian cultures and Asian people in Canadian pop culture. So, what would you say is the landscape for 2025? How's representation doing for API communities in Canadian pop culture right now?
I think it's better than it's been in a long time. I still feel like there's so much work to be done, and I feel like a lot of people don't love to hear that and do feel like there's been a bigger shift than I think there's been, but I think we're still seeing a lot of roles where we're seeing Asian identity kind of rolled into one. So, for instance, all brown people will kind of be represented by one character, or all Asian people will be represented by one character. And I don't think that's very accurate or fair representation. And then at the same time, a lot of the time there's only a few key lead roles we'll see
Hmm.
for people of color, and that's in very few programming. So, for instance, we do have really great, or we have had really great sitcoms like Run the Burbs, Kim's
Hmm.
Convenience, but you can count those on one hand, and those are ever
Hmm.
so wrapped. So it's not as good as it could be, but I think it's getting better, is what I will say.
Hmm. Are there any gems that are currently on the air that we should know about?
Yeah, there's a few on CBC Gem that I really like. So are there a few that you really love?
I quite like Late Bloomer. It's currently on. You can
Um,
watch it on Crave. That is one that I really like. I think that it's a story that, I mean, it's a simple story. It's easy to understand, but we haven't exactly seen that story in Canadian popular culture yet, which is about somebody who is trying to navigate his ties to his family and his culture while also wanting to pursue relationships. And you can get to meet a lot of different people who are South Asian who have different relationships to their culture. It's not monolithic, right? And that I
Mhm.
really like the different perspectives and how everyone negotiates their identity in a slightly different way. So I really appreciate that. It's also hysterical, right? I mean, the reason to watch a
Yeah.
sitcom, the primary reason should always be that it's funny, and it's very, very funny.
Yes, I totally agree. That's a good one. And then one that I've really, really loved in the past little while is Sort of, which stars and is created and written by Bilal Baig, who is this really great Pakistani Canadian creator. And it recently wrapped up, but it just hit Netflix, so it's even more accessible. And it's about a character who is a trans person who's going through a lot of change in their life, and the sitcom just generally talks about what it's like to go through big shifts in your life, and it's such a great and fun cast. It's really funny, and it's a really good, surprising representation of a Pakistani family living in the West. It's really good.
And I think, in my opinion, I mean, and I say this as somebody who, I mean, I have Asian family members, but I'm not myself Asian. One text that I really love that I think is one of the coolest texts that explores Asian identity in Canada from the last decade is Turning Red, which is made by
Yeah.
a Canadian creator, but it's Pixar. It's Disney. It's as American as you can get. However, it's so culturally specific, and I love that. And I wish Canada would produce more art like that because that could have been Canadian.
Yeah, I know, I know. God, I loved that movie so much. That's such a good example. Also very representative of Toronto and just
Hmm.
how multicultural it is. God, I loved that movie. I know, you're right, you're right. Which and by the way, the creator who was involved with all that, the animator is Canadian.
Hmm.
She went to Sheridan College, which has a
Yeah.
great animation program. I mean, a
Yeah,
lot of
amazing animation
people.
program. Yeah, but it's just so sad that if you're a creator like that with a story like that to tell, you have to leave, right? That you can't tell that story, which is so Canadian, right? I mean, they talk about loonies and toonies. They talk about the TTC and taking the TTC, the Daisy Mart, right? It's so culturally specific, right? They
Yes.
talk about Toronto's Chinatown. I mean, I know there are multiple, but it's situated in one. And it's a beautiful story, and it's so important for representation, but it's just funny that that was the Disney Corporation, perhaps the most American of American corporations, that gave us that. So much of the Asian representation in American popular culture comes from Canadian performers, right? So I'm thinking of Never Have I Ever, great show, and I'm grateful to Mindy Kaling for giving that to us. But we easily could have made something like that here. Same thing with Sex Lives of College Girls. So many prominent South Asian actresses are going to the States to get cast who are
Mhm.
from Canada originally.
Well, I mean, we have Simu Liu, Iman Vellani,
Hmm.
2 huge Marvel stars now. I do think that's really interesting. I think if you wanna have a really big career and have more choice, it
Hmm.
seems like going to the States is the way to go. I also think it's really fascinating, though, like in the case of Iman and Kamala Khan, they ended up coming here to do the casting and found their girl from here, like, I feel like
Hmm.
that says a lot. We just don't have productions like of that
Yeah.
size in Canada, and I'm
Hmm.
not sure that we ever will. That's the other thing. So it's definitely a smaller road if you're starting here, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, that is a thing that, I mean, Canadian actors of all backgrounds have gone to the States to seek their fortunes. But it does strike me as a lost opportunity because there are a lot of these shows that don't necessarily require huge budgets. I mean, obviously something like Ms. Marvel does. But
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, something like Never Have I Ever, we could have a Canadian version of that, right? There's no reason we can't do, a high school comedy like that
Yeah.
takes place in Toronto or Vancouver or Calgary. So, I mean, that's to me the missed opportunity, not the big budget stuff. I understand there will always be a reason for an animator to go to Disney. There will always be a reason for somebody who wants to be an action star to want to be in Marvel. But the sitcoms are things that we had produced in the past and we could. So it does feel like maybe Canada should focus more on trying to tell more of these stories.
I think so. I think it would be so great, and I think so much of that has to do with also having the people who make those choices and who decide where the funding goes, who are
Hmm.
involved with casting and production. Those people need to be people of color or Asian folks because otherwise it doesn't really make much of a difference. Like I've been writing about this for years, and that's the number one thing that keeps popping up. If we don't have our people in the seats up top, the changes don't actually come through because that's why you still end up with very stereotypical roles
Hmm.
with shows that are still all about being a model minority or like how
Hmm.
much someone loves butter chicken and big
Hmm.
weddings and like K-pop. Like, I want some things that are a little bit different. Show me something new. Show me the variety of what our people are like. None of it has to be so culturally oriented. I think that's the other thing. Like, I would love to see a movie made here, a TV show made here where like there's just an average character who happens to be Asian and not
Hmm.
everything about them, or there's no huge big trait about them that is so Asian. Like that's also okay. We still don't see that here.
Let's talk about Asian representation in the music industry. So, how's that going?
I think it's getting better too. I mean, I can certainly say one of the biggest things in the last, I want to say a couple of years, but especially in the past year, we've seen so many Canadian Punjabi musicians blow up, which is really, really
Hmm.
exciting. To the point where the Juno Awards added a whole new category for them. The category that they added is South Asian Music Recording of the Year. That's so massive. Nobody has that. That's incredible. I was very surprised when they announced that, and that also shows that the academy behind the Juno sees that there's promise and there's a future there. And when an awards show does something like this, it might seem like it means nothing, but it actually just it enhances the scope. It shows that people are paying attention. It gives a really needed platform to those artists. Karan Ojala is a big star in that group. He's been really, really popular over the past year. And another person who's become like a really big star in the last couple of years is Jonita Gandhi. She's a great singer. She sings in multiple languages. She comes from Toronto. She's also based in India. She's really phenomenal. Also, Luna Lee is a big one. She's Korean. And
Okay.
then also Kelly Hu, who is Chinese. Kelly Hu is also a songwriter, so she's phenomenal. I think she acts as well. And Luna was nominated for a Juno as well recently, and she's really great. But again, I think in this certain case, we're seeing South Asians kind of, I don't want to say eclipsing, but they certainly had a bigger platform in the last couple of years than
Hmm.
Canadian Asian singers. It's hard for me to name a few off the top of my head that are newer and are making a bigger splash recently. Mm.
So let's talk a little bit about books. So do you have any book recommendations? A lot of our listeners love books. I mean, I can always start. So I really, really love Uzma Jalaluddin's comedies. I
Oh, I
mean, one of
love
my
her.
favorite books to reread is Hana Khan Carries On. I think that's so much fun. It's kind of this adaptation of You've Got Mail that takes place in Toronto, and the lead is South Asian, and it's a beautiful love story, and she wants to be a podcaster.
That's
And
a good one.
it's so much fun, and the representation is it's at once culturally specific, but it defies stereotypes, right? Because you've never seen a story before about a South Asian girl who like her dream is to be a podcaster, and it's just all about her trying to be a
I
podcaster
love
and
that
also
one.
dating.
Yes, that's such a good one. Oh, I love that one a lot. That's a really good one. Okay, one I'm gonna name is Frizana Doctor, who I love
Mhm.
so much. And she's really interesting because she's a doctor, she's also an activist, she's also been a therapist. Okay, so I think some people will remember, but she wrote Seven in,
Mhm.
I want to say it was in 2020. It's a really great book. It's a lot about, it centers a lot on inheritance, and it's a good,
Mhm.
juicy sort of feminist drama, sir. I think you would really love it actually. And
Mm.
she has a new book, a relatively new book. It came out last year called The Beauty of Us. It's really fantastic. I really like Rohinton Mystery. I also really love, okay, I feel like a lot of Canadians who went to school here are gonna side eye me, but I love Michael Ondaatje a lot. Also, that is a
Yeah.
really handsome man. I love him. He's great. I also do want to mention some East Asian authors because I feel like I'm like Vincent Lam is really great.
Mhm.
Kim Tui is really fantastic. Really gorgeous, gorgeous book that I read last year, called The Light of Eternal Spring. That's a book that's written by Canadian author Angel D. Zhang. Oh my God, it's gorgeous. I highly recommend that. She's really fantastic. She's Chinese Canadian. A lot of it is based on her own experience and growing up with her family specifically. It's really lovely. I want to mention another one that I really loved this year, Rachel Chen's Restaurant Kid. It's so good, and I love the premise. It's a memoir, but honestly, I think it could be adapted into just about anything. But it's a story about growing up with a family who runs and owns an Asian restaurant in
Hmm.
Ontario, and that's the story for quite a few people. And so it's really relatable, I think, but also it's about her coming of age. Other writers I just want to mention, Madeline Tien is really fantastic. Um, Also, Leanne Zhang has a new book called Julie Chan is Dead, which I have not read yet, but I've heard very good things. So definitely way more options when it comes to books.
Hmm.
More options. And sir, what do you think that means exactly, that there's more space in the literary world to be made? Or that
Okay,
has been
so
made?
and this is just I mean, I understand that when you write a book, you do need to get a lot of yeses from
Mm,
institutions and the infrastructure, but I feel like there are fewer barriers to entry, right? So I feel like if you produce the book, you decide to write it yourself, and then you pitch it, and people, if you can get them to read it and it's objectively good, I feel like they think, okay, it's not like now we have to spend millions of dollars making this. It's not like film or TV where I think there's just a higher barrier to entry, in my opinion. And it also could just be that in literature, I think they have been. Literature is not perfect, the world of literature and publishing. I do think they've been having a lot of these conversations for longer than we have, and there's still lots of problems. There is still a lot of racism. There's still a ton of sexism, and it's interesting because that there's so much sexism because women are basically in our society the only people who read books now.
yeah,
Men don't read books, even
wild.
though there's still a ton of sexism.
Man, please
Um,
pick up books. Please start reading.
exactly, exactly. So I don't know if I think it's probably a combination of factors. What do you think it is?
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I also think part of it is that there's entire groups, I think, with a lot of these large publishers, which is great, that are actually dedicated to
Mm-hmm.
finding
Mm-hmm.
authors who are of different backgrounds, which is so important. Like, I think that's what studios need to be doing in television
Mm-hmm.
networks and actually putting the money in. And they do have more bodies, is what I gather. As a journalist, I get so much marketing from different publicists all the
Mm-hmm.
time telling me, here's new books by new Asian authors, by Black authors, Indigenous authors that you should check out, and I hope you can give it some spotlight. I very rarely get that kind of content or publicity from people in film or television or really any other kind of medium. But again, maybe that's because the content just isn't there. But I think it just needs to be more focused attention and bringing it in and showing it off. But it is, I think you're right, Sarah. I think they've just been working on it so much longer. I think those inroads were made a while back because, again, like Michael Ondaatje is a great example of someone
Yeah.
I read when I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference. Like Amy Tan, I read her when I was in school. She's
I
also
love Amy Tan.
fantastic. She's so great. Great documentary about her too. I think on Netflix, though, she's phenomenal. But yeah, I just why have books been giving us a little bit more room? I think maybe also because there's more Asian folks who are working behind the scenes. That's my best guess.
Well, there's also, I think that books have become, and this is very sad, but they've become less and less relevant to popular culture, and publishing houses are under threat. So I think that part of the reason they were looking for more communities and markets is in capitalism, it's always the money motive. And I think they just came across that money motive for diversification sooner than TV and film did. I think that's a lot of it. And I know that there are lots of great, hardworking editors who that's not their motive. And I'm not trying to say that that's everyone's motive, but the people at the top, I do think, and this is a cynical part of me, that I do think a lot of representation happens when people realize there's a market, right? Just like every time we have an action movie starring women, it has to make a fortune or they're never going to make one again, right? It has to prove that it deserves to exist financially, right? People that's so much of our art in a capitalist society exists because it's financially viable for it to exist. And it's not that it can't be good. You can have something that's popular and excellent, but a lot of stuff that's also excellent that might not have as big a market doesn't get made for that reason.
That's such a good I'm so glad you brought that up, Sarah, because that's the big thing. That's what I always think. And again, every time I look into this, the numbers are there, the money is there. For all of these networks and studios, yes, they all have a bottom line. That's the only thing they really care about. But here's the good news. When you have content that has very diverse people, people show up to see it.
Hmm.
So Kim's Convenience, Run the Burbs, two uber popular sitcoms
Hmm.
were very diverse, did so well, and that's because their casts were entirely Asian. Sort of as well did really, really well for the network. And that's saying a lot because that's diverse in multiple ways, right?
Hmm.
It was also very LGBT centric. So
Yep.
I feel like there's a fear to diversify, but if you just look at the numbers, if you just look at the reports, it shows you that it actually pays off is so well. Like if we branch off a little bit, if we're not just talking about Asian folks, I think the one of the greatest examples, and this is just I think speaks well for anyone, is Sinners recently. This amazing Ryan
Hmm.
Coogler movie just did insane box office numbers, and it's a completely original movie. It's not part of a franchise,
Hmm.
and it's a black cast. There's a little bit of an Asian cast as well. It's done so well because Black folks are excited to go see themselves, and so they've shown up in droves because they don't get that all the time.
Hmm.
And, I feel like that's just a really great example of what happens when you cast other people, people who look like us. We are gonna show up.
Absolutely. And I mean, we can take a page from Netflix. Never Have I Ever was one of their most popular shows. And it is a story that centers South Asian people. I mean, it's very diverse cast, right? It's a
Yeah.
very diverse cast. So I think that is part of the secret to the success. It looks like Los Angeles, the city that it is representing. You see that class, and you're like, that is how diverse the class would be. And so it's also diverse personalities, and the kids have diverse interests. It's diverse on many, many levels, but we see that if the only reason you're making something is to make money, diversity sells. So we can all
Yes.
just take, I mean, that's not, shouldn't be the only reason we're making things, but it's the idea that you're not going to make money should not stop you from
No.
diverse representations. It should not hold you back.
No, and I think another thing I want to say, and also maybe potentially controversial, but I think for a lot of these, again, networks and studios, they will kind of find one property or one person or creator who I think they feel like can check a box and then they don't
Yeah.
have to do anything anymore.
Hmm.
So, for instance, like Run the Burbs or Kim's Convenience, I feel like those stood like that for a bit, or like a Bollywood docuseries,
Hmm.
or like having Amanda Paris at the helm at CBC. She's so wonderful. I think she's an icon, frankly. But I'd love to see more of her at the CBC. Like, let's not just let it be Amanda Paris. I want to see other people and what else they can create. Like, we need to foster more talent like that. And it can't just, that's not the end of the sentence. Like, there needs to be more. And it also, I keep saying CBC. CBC is just where I see that. What about the other networks? Show us what you can do. There's others. Let's see.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Sadaf, thank you so much for joining us and lending us your expertise. So, where can our listeners find you?
Listeners can find me at my website where I can link through to just about everything.
Oh,
So
awesome.
stephason.com. Make it easy for you.
Okay, that's fantastic. All right. Well, everybody, have a great day, and please enjoy some of these media texts that we recommended to you.
That was Sadaf Ahsan and Rabble publisher Sarah Sahagian in conversation. Thanks so much for that, Sarah and Sadaf. And now, this is our In Case You Missed It segment, where we review the top stories from this week on rabble.ca. For that, let's go to Rabble editor Nick Seabrook. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Brianne. This week in national news. King Charles III came to Canada to deliver the speech from the throne, officially opening the new session of Parliament. The speech, written by Prime Minister Mark Carney's team, focused on many of the Liberals' campaign promises, like building more housing. The opposition parties found little to criticize, with the official opposition Conservatives merely stating that it lacked details. The NDP, led by interim leader Don Davies, also praised the speech, but added that he hoped to see stronger commitments for affordable housing. Being a minority government, Carney's Liberals will need the support of one other party in order for the throne speech to pass in the House of Commons. One notable theme in the speech was the emphasis on Canada's unique identity and sovereignty, with King Charles III stating that it was important for Canada to remain, quote, the true north, strong and free, end quote. In labor news, for more than a month now, employees at Canadian Hearing Services have been on strike. The workers are represented by CUPE Local 2073 and are striking for both better pay and to improve staffing levels at the organization. In an op-ed on Rabble, Sammy Jo Johnson, a child of deaf parents, said that one of the problems at Canadian Hearing Services stems from a lack of understanding of the community that they serve. Johnson explains that Canadian Hearing Services focuses on healing and mitigating hearing issues, while ignoring that being deaf is more than just a condition but also a culture. She says that this prevents the organization from advocating for deaf people who experience discrimination in the workplace. For these reasons, Johnson feels that the next Canadian Hearing Services CEO should be a deaf person. In environmental news, the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board has dropped its commitment to reach net zero in its carbon footprint by 2050. Shift Action for Pension Wealth and Planet Health criticized the move, saying that it ignores not only the well-being of the planet, but also the physical and financial well-being of those with money invested in the Canadian Pension Plan. For its part, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board said that it made this decision to avoid what it called, quote, legal uncertainty, which it claimed it would face if it stuck with its net zero commitment. Shift Action for Pension Wealth and Planet Health says that this attitude fails to take into account what sort of world Canadians will be retiring into if climate change remains unchecked. And finally, June is National Indigenous History Month. As a part of her column on rabble.ca, Lois Ross examines one Saskatchewan-based organization dedicated to enacting reconciliation with Indigenous peoples through land sharing. Ross explains that 10 years ago, when the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued its 94 calls to action, the return of occupied land to Indigenous peoples was not included. Since its launch in 2021, the Treaty Land Sharing Network has accumulated over 40,000 hectares of land across 59 locations where land is shared between Indigenous peoples and colonizers. It is the only such organization of its kind in Canada. As always, you can read the full version of all the stories we talked about today on rabble.ca.
Thanks, Nick. And that's it for Rabble Radio this week. Thanks as always for tuning in. If you like the show, please consider subscribing to Rabble Radio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please rate, review, share Rabble Radio with your friends. It takes 2 seconds to support independent media like Rabble. Thank you to the journalists and writers who contributed to this week's content on rabble.ca, and thank you to Carl Nierenberg for supplying the music. Lastly, thank you to you for tuning in to Rabble Radio. I'm Brianne Doyle, and I'll talk to you next week.